2 legs, 2 arms, a head, and then a variety of facial features. Massager boys, and you can see this one has a lot of hair compared to some of the other ones. Some of them clothing and other accessories. So some dolls are going to have a lot going on. Hello and welcome to the chaos. In today's video, I want to talk all about doll making. I actually had a comment on my last video from Enchanted Skein, so thank you very much for that comment, asking about the different dolls that I've made and basically, how to make them less intimidating for those who maybe haven't made them before or have thought to themselves, I couldn't make something like that. It's too complicated. It's too complex. So I just kind of wanted to go over some of the details on doll making and maybe hopefully make it a little less scary for people who haven't tried it before, because they really are a lot of fun to make. I just noticed though, poor Dean here is turned the wrong way there. But as you can see, I do have some experience in making crochet dolls. I do really enjoy making the different dolls and different characters from TV shows and movies and different kind of pop culture kind of things. So we're going to just dive right in and talk about that. So the first thing I want to kind of go over is kind of the definition of what makes a doll as opposed to like a stuffy. Now, obviously, they are still stuffies in and of themselves because they are stuffed creations. But as far as I believe, or my opinion goes, a doll would be something that is anthropomorphic, more human-like in its proportions. So standing on 2 legs, in particular, 2 legs, 2 arms, a head, and then a variety of facial features. And hair or hats or other accessories, that kind of thing. So that would be different from, a cow or a dragon or, any other of those kind of more 4-legged, more animalistic things. Not to say that a doll can't still be somewhat animal-like, like this goblin. I do consider it a doll, although it is quite clearly a fantasy creature and not human. It is still humanoid in that it has the 2 legs, it stands upright, 2 arms, more of a human proportions, and it's made in much the same way that many doll patterns are made. So that's where I'm going from. That's what I'll be talking about. Just to kind of show you some of the dolls that I've made in the past, so we can kind of get an overview. You can see these guys back here. This is my supernatural trio. I made these guys in particular for my own self to keep as decorations in the back. I just showed you I have this little lady right here. She's a floppy leg doll, but still the same, still a doll, just a different way to make them. A little bit simpler than one of the ones with a lot of hair or something. Most recently, I have made massager boys, and these are quite big. These are actually very similar to these guys, but I made these guys with Parfait Chunky and Naughty Ball and Posh yarn, so they turned out a good bit smaller, whereas this is made with blanket yarn, so it's bigger and heavier. Let's see, and then I also have, some of you may have seen these guys before. I have my Harry and Hermione dolls. And you can see this one has a lot of hair compared to some of the other ones. Some of them have very little hair. Some of them have more clothing accessories. And, oh yeah, here's another good example. Link. This is another doll. And to first look at them, you would think these are pretty complex. There seems to be a lot going on with them, a lot of little details and stuff. But a lot of times it's not nearly as complicated as you would think when you first jump into it. So most of these dolls that have the 2 legs like this that are just attached into the body, you begin, especially with these guys, and these are all, most of these are Fox and Fay crochet patterns. You begin by making one leg up to a certain point and stopping, and then you start the second leg up to the same point, and rather than cutting it off, you join the 2 legs and then you continue to work the body up from that point. So if you've gotten yourself used to that kind of a connection, the main body part of a doll is not going to be a big deal for you with this kind of doll specifically. There are tips and tricks for making this join across where the legs connect more seamless. I've tried a few different ones and kind of settled on one that I particularly like. My favorite way to connect between 2 legs is when you've finished off the first leg, cut the yarn and set it aside. You get to the same point on the second leg. In that same stitch, the final stitch that you do, I do a decrease from that one into the first stitch of the second leg and work around the second leg. And when you get back to the end of the second leg, you single crochet all the way around, and in that same final crochet stitch, decrease from that to connect back to the first leg. So you're by decreasing in the same stitch that you've already placed a stitch, you are not actually removing any stitches from the total number, if that makes any sense. Um, so you still get the same total number that you're supposed to get all around, but doing that decrease in between where they connect helps to eliminate that hole that sometimes happens in between the two. Now, if that's a little complex and you don't want to have to figure that out, that's fine. The other method of doing that is to simply just crochet into the next stitch of the new leg, work your way around, and then just crochet back into the first one. And it will leave a little bit of a hole here, which you have to tail from the first leg that you just used to sew that closed. So both methods are completely valid. It just is up to you whether you want to sew that hole closed later or try to do something to begin with that is a little bit more complex, might take a little more brain power to avoid having the hole at all. And that's just up to you and how you want to do things. So that's kind of the first thing that most people find very complex or intimidating about these dolls is connecting these two legs. So knowing that, it's really not as hard as it looks. Um, and if you really just want to do it the simplest way, you just make your first leg, go ahead and stitch into the first. When you make your second leg, you just stitch into that first stitch, work your way around, stitch into the first one, and then again without doing anything special, and then you have that little tail and you just sew up the hole. Very quick, very easy, not difficult at all. The only other difficulty that may come with some doll patterns and putting these legs together is if the pattern has created some kind of shaping for the foot that makes it a different shape pointing towards the front than it does anywhere else. This one is not the best example of that. It kind of curves a little bit, but not enough to make a huge difference. Let me see if I have one that really kind of, okay, yeah. So something to kind of illustrate that point. See how his shoes really bend forward on both. So you would need to line up your stitches so that those are both facing the same way. And sometimes in order to do that, you need to either add or remove stitches from your second leg before you connect to the first one, or you might wind up with a leg that goes out like that. But that just takes looking at it, lining it up as you're working on it. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll take the two legs side by side, one that still has the working yarn attached to it, line them so they're facing the correct direction, and then touch them in the middle. And where they touch that stitch, where they connect, I'll put a stitch marker to hold them together. And that's where you want to connect the two with your first stitch from the working yarn to the new one. So if I need to add a stitch or two to get there or remove a stitch or two to get there, that's what I'll do. But that's how I figure out how to make sure to get them lining forward like you want them to. So that's one of the things, that's the thing I would consider the first sort of more intimidating aspects of dolls. The second thing that I think is probably really intimidating to people is the hair. And that is just going to be your personal preference on how well you deal with working in chains. If it's something that you're okay with and it doesn't bother you to make a bunch of chains, work your way back up them, it is time consuming sometimes, then hair is not going to be a bother to you at all. It's not nearly as complicated as it looks. The end result looks more complicated than it is because of the work we do after the hair is made to make it lay where we want it to go. Usually, in most cases, hair is made with a wig cap. You start with a circle, and it just depends on the pattern how big that circle is going to be. This one, I only covered the crown of her head with the circle and then started making hair outward. Let me see if I can, yeah, here we go. Genu is another good example. So for Genu, the circle of for his, as you can see, covers most of his head. And then we actually went in and added pieces on top. So his is like a beanie on top of his head, and then more pieces added on top for the dimension and the structure of his hair. So those are two different ways you're going to see hair done with dolls. Another way, if a character has a hat, such as Link here, the hat is made And then the extra was, I believe, surface crocheted. So he actually doesn't have any hair on underneath his hat at all. It's just surface crocheted around the rim of the hat to give the impression of hair underneath the hat. So if hair is something that's intimidating to you, think of it like it's a beanie. If you ever made a beanie before, it's not really all that different than the rest of amigurumi. You're just not stuffing it. It's a circle that just gets bigger until it's as big as you want it to go, and then it goes down. And that's what most amigurumi doll hair is going to be to begin with. It's going to be a cap. And then once you have your cap on, you just go back and add some chain out and crochet back strands that you can then shape in any way that you choose for your doll. Okay, and as far as shaping goes, most of the time you're going to do that by sewing them down. You don't have to. You can use hot glue, and I have used hot glue in the past. I do both methods. I think for her, I did entirely hot glue to hold her hair where I wanted it to be. When I have a lot of strands like this to work with, I tend to prefer hot glue to sewing because it holds it down faster, and it just makes it easier for me to just kind of move from strand to strand to strand to strand and not have to like pin them down and then sew them into place. So for her, again, her wig cap is just a little circle right here, and then it started chaining out after that. And you can see how she's got some strands pulled back on top. It's very simple. All it was this circle. I chained out and crocheted back the required number of times for the pattern. And she has the longer chains that were probably like 30. I don't remember exactly, but probably like 30 chains. And then she has some in the front for her bangs. There were probably maybe 10 or 12 chains that you could then crochet back. So I glued the wig cap in place where I wanted it to on the crown of her head, arranged her bangs how I wanted them to go up to a certain point. I didn't go all the way because I still had to put the crown on. So I arranged the bangs on up to a certain point, put the crown on, and then finished gluing the bangs down. Then I had just the rest of the strands to go across the back. So for them, I just one at a time, starting on one edge, worked my way towards the middle until I had those all flat down how I wanted them to. And then I took the final two and pulled them in the back and glued them under the bow and then glued the bow on. It really didn't take as long as you might think, especially because I used glue instead of sewing. If I'd sewn all of these down, which I've done with other dolls, first I would have taken each strand and pinned it in place with a pin so that it couldn't move out of the way as I was sewing other ones. And then took a long strand of yarn and I usually just tack it down. So I would have tacked it down up here at the top and then maybe one more time here at the bottom to hold it flush to her head the way I would want it to. And just do one tack, 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 all the way around until I got it done, which would have taken a little bit longer than hot gluing. Not a lot of time longer, but enough that I preferred to do hot glue on her. So that's another thing. So if you're intimidated by hair, remember it's just a beanie with strands. So if you're used to chaining things, especially if you've made any kind of octopus or jellyfish or anything like that, it's not going to be any different. It's not going to be different than that. Facial features and ears and things like that. Obviously, with something like this, with like elfin ears, you're going to have a larger pattern to work with for the ears. But really, it's no different than making ears for a dragon and sewing that on into the place that it needs to be. Let's see. So that's like, yeah, that's basically the only ones I can think of that are like the really intimidating part of doll making. Oh, or maybe, yeah, clothing. Okay, clothing and other accessories. So some dolls are going to have a lot going on. This guy's got his wings. He has his trench coat. He's got his tie. He's got his collar. And to look at it, you would think, man, that's a lot of pieces. That's a lot of pieces. But for this particular pattern, and I can't speak to all doll patterns, but for this particular pattern, which is a fox and fae pattern, a lot of this is done with surface crochet work. Now, the trench coat is its own separate piece that you make and sew on. The arms are color changed. So it's flesh tone color and then trench coat color, and then they're sewn on over the trench coat. Then this is a separate piece. So this is really just a flat piece. It gets wrapped around and sewn on. So kind of like making a washcloth or something. The tie is again just a flat piece that gets sewn on, or in my case, glued into place. The collar was done with circus crochet. So the collar doesn't actually go all the way around, it's just in this front part. So you see, even though it looks like it's a ton of details on something like this, or on one of these guys that have like bits of their shirt peeking out from the jacket, it's not as much work to create the appearance of the detail as you would think. And he does also have the wings, which is a separate piece, and they are crocheted over um, wires that can be bent. So that's a little bit extra on him, but again, that's something you can really tell when you first look at the pattern. Is it going to have a ton of these extra bits, extra accessories? And if it does, just keep in mind that that's probably going to take a little bit longer than one that doesn't have all of those accessories. So let's see, what else I want to talk about. Recommendations. Different kinds of pattern makers, different kinds of dolls. I have tried a few different ones, not a ton, but a few. Fox and Faye is one of my favorites. So most of the dolls I have are made from her patterns. I have also made dolls from Madeline Mako's patterns, and her patterns are very, very beginner friendly. So if you're wanting to jump into doll making, she has a bunch of dolls that are very simple but very effective patterns. She has a lot, especially in this newer style of hers, that has like these dangly legs and rounded bodies. They're very cute. This one is not directly her pattern. This I modified from her mushroom pattern. She's a mushroom person that has just a white body and then a mushroom cap. So I color changed, added a skirt, and then did a flower cap instead of a mushroom cap. But she also has Wednesday Adams. She has a cute little witch pattern. She has, I think, what other characters she has? Jack and Sally, and just a whole lot. They're kind of like this with like the dangly legs. One of the nice things about Madeline Mako's patterns in particular, if you're brand new into doll making, but you really want to try to make some of these really cute character dolls, is that they're pretty much no sew. There's very little sewing involved in her patterns. So you make the legs and the arms first, and then as you're making the body, she instructs you to crochet the legs in, to crochet the arms in. The body works straight into the head, so there's no separate sewing of the head. So if there's any extra sewing, it would be for accessories, such as the mushroom pattern, you would sew on the mushroom cap. For hair on the character dolls, we would create the hair cap and sew the hair cap on, similar to these bigger dolls. But with that being the only sewing, they're much more beginner friendly and more accessible for people who are just trying to get into doll making for the first time and don't want to jump straight into some of the more complicated patterns. I would say Fox and Fays, though, are probably the second most beginner friendly for making dolls for the first time. Again, as I said, you're going to make these legs separate and connect them in the middle and then work your way up. For her pattern, she does have you make the head separately and sew it on. But that's really not a difficult thing. Where the body ends and where the head ends is the same number of stitches around. So you just make sure your head is centered and use your sewing sticks to hold it in place, and then you're just going stitch by stitch all the way around the neck, and it lines right up. So that makes it very, very easy to do. This was also a Madeline Mako doll, her little goblin pattern. This one has the same kind of situation where you connect at the legs, but again, the arms are made beforehand, the ears are made beforehand and crocheted in. For this one, the only thing you sew on are the horns. So very easy, very beginner friendly. Another doll maker that I have used and enjoyed the patterns of is Margarumi, who makes these Sailor Moon dolls. She also has a few other Demon Slayer patterns. I think she has One Piece patterns, a lot of more of like the nerdy kind of characters, TV shows, animes, that kind of thing. And similar to Fox and Faye, hers have, the two legs that you put together, you go up to the neck, the head is made separately. I believe she has you sew the arms on. No, I think the arms are crocheted in. So the arms on hers are crocheted in. at least on these dolls. It might be different on other ones of hers that I haven't tried yet. Um, then you go back and surface crochet the skirt. She does have a few extra pieces, especially with these dolls, of the accessories that wind up getting sewn on afterward, like this little detail above the skirt, then the collar, the tiara, the bows that go on their hair. Those are extra details that get made separately and sewn on. But for the most part, they are smaller details and don't take very much work to sew on or glue into place as you choose to do. But I would put her as, of these three pattern designers in particular, I would put her as the more complicated of the three. Also, hers tend to be bigger. So this is Fox and Faye made in basically parfait chunky. There's a few other things mixed in here, but parfait chunky. And then this is amigurumi made in parfait chunky. So you can see that it's bigger, a good bit bigger. This is about the size of the Fox and Faye dolls that I make in blanket yarn, but I made it with smaller yarn. So if I were to make hers in blanket yarn, they would be very large. They'd be very, very large dolls, which is why I prefer to make hers in this smaller yarn, because I don't really want to go up to like 18-inch dolls. That seems excessive. So if you're looking to get into making dolls, I would definitely suggest picking out one of Madeline Mako's patterns to start with. They're not going to be much of a step above what you're already used to with other kind of creatures. Probably the only difference you're going to see is making a wig cap for something that has extra hair. So I think that'd be a really great start. And then when you're ready to jump into something really, really fun, try out Fox and Faye, because she's got some fantastic patterns. And hers are the ones that I'm able to mod pretty easily into other characters. The base doll pattern just works. It just works really well. And all it takes is some color changes, and you can create just about anybody you want to. Trying to think if there's anything else really to say about doll making. I hope that maybe this helps if you've been a little nervous about trying it, that you may be more willing to jump in and try one. They are a lot of fun. Time it takes. That was another question that she had as well. So these little guys, the Madeline Mako ones. And then, I had one other one. Where did she go? This is Penelope Petals by Cable and Canvas. So this, you can see the similarity between these two. This was the inspiration I had for changing up Madeline Mako's. This is Cable and Canvas, Penelope Petals. I think she might have a bigger version of this doll as well. I'm not sure. But this follows the same kind of procedure with two legs that are connected in the middle, worked up into the body, and then she works directly into the head. The head isn't sewn on. This is a separate piece that gets sewn on afterward. The arms get sewn on afterward. The skirt is surface crocheted on. So again, very low sew, not very much sewing that needs to be done. And I really do like this one. I think it's very cute, but it's smaller than I had wanted, which is why I modded the Madeline Mako pattern to look like this, because I wanted this, but bigger. And I liked the dangly legs of the Madeline Mako pattern. So the main difficulty, I would say, with this pattern in particular, if you're looking at dolls and you want to try one, is that all of the magic rings that start this doll start in like 3 or 4. So they're small. So if you're not used to working in really small magic rings, or if that's something that is not fun for you, that's something to consider, that they start small. But like I said, I think she does have a bigger pattern for this style as well. I just don't have that pattern. But this is another one that would be a good starter one. So her pattern, I would say, takes me 2 hours altogether to make. It would go faster if it weren't for the smaller starting ring. I tend to always go slower when I have to start in such a small space. It takes me a little longer to get up to speed with those. So I would say about 2 hours for that. The Madeline Mako dolls, about an hour to an hour and a half for these. I can work through these much, much faster. And I actually have this pattern just about memorized because of how often I've made it by now. So these are pretty quick. The Fox and Faye crochet patterns generally take me 6 to 8 hours, depending on the level of detail. So this guy took me 6 because he had the probably the least amount of hair of all of them. So yeah, 6 hours on this guy. Um, Now, some of her patterns with the more detail, like Castiel back there, took a good bit longer. He was over 8 hours for sure. And I think Harry, let me pull him out. I think Harry took me about 8 or 10, but that's because I added a lot more detail to him. So he was another one that I started with a Fox and Faye pattern as the base, um, or several of her patterns as the base. Like I used Castiel's trench coat. I believe this was Dean's hair. No, this was Crowley's hair. Um, and then I just color changed. The main body is the same from them all, so I just color changed as needed. The tie was from Castiel, so the tie and the trench coat both from Castiel, and then I made up the hood on the back of his cloak myself. But his took a lot longer because of the hood, some extra big chunk of crocheting there, and because I wanted the cloak to be lined in red, so I essentially made the cloak twice and then crocheted it together. So he took a much longer time. So that's something to consider. He doesn't look like he has as many details as some of the others, but because of the size of this cloak and making it twice and the extra hood, he took longer than a lot of the others. That's length of time for him. And then same for Margurumi's patterns. Because there's a few extra pieces here and there, I would say that her patterns take me around 8 to 10 hours to complete. I generally do not complete any of these within one day. I generally stretch them out over 2 or 3 days. But if you want a doll that you can make in a day and be done with, I can make 2 or 3 of these guys in a day, the Madeline Mako dolls. So that's time frame. So yeah, so my favorite designers, patterns that are easy for beginners, some tips to get past some of the harder parts or the parts that are a little bit more intimidating, how long it takes to make them. I think I've covered everything I wanted to cover today. So I hope this helps. I hope that you are inspired. No cat, stop. Sorry. I hope that you are inspired to make some dolls of your own, and I hope that you will tag me in Instagram if you make some so I can see what you've come up with. And I hope that you will visit me in the next video. Bye. What are you doing? What are you doing, Charlie? You are ridiculous, cat. Ridiculous. You are the Maharaja. Raja.